have an extraordinarily distinguished panel to speak on the issues of entrepreneurship and innovation. And one of the things we tried to do as we put this panel together is to actually have people who represent different aspects of entrepreneurship and innovation. So we have, somebody like Professor Jhunjhunwala, who is not just an entrepreneur, but also a great researcher and scientist, and his ability to develop new technologies and innovate absolutely new business models is extraordinary. Tarun, of course, has had an extraordinary career in terms of studying entrepreneurship around the world, so he does bring that academic perspective. But then we have two entrepreneurs and venture capitalists that have actually built companies, made them extremely successful, gotten great exits, and have also then been angel investors and investors as well. So what you'll get from this panel is just a very interesting spectrum of views across the whole entrepreneurship innovation value chain. So we're very, very fortunate to have them. The other thing I will say is that, since I give speeches for a living, I'm not very fond of giving speeches as a result of that. So let's try and do this in a very informal, interactive way. It's not a large group or a large room here. So we can try and do it interactively. Everybody will have some prepared remarks which they'll give, but then let's try and really make sure that it's interactive and engaging as a result of that. All that being said, as you all know, government's job is to get out of the way. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to ask Mukesh to come up and kick us off in terms of his thinking on innovation.
So first of all, I want to thank the organizers of India Foundation, Vinodji and Shaurya and everybody else. The whole team has done a wonderful job to create this marketplace of ideas, and it's been a wonderful experience. I want to thank the whole team who put it all together. Why is innovation so important? A nation or a society or a civilization decides their future based on how advanced they are in terms of technology. Look back in the history, as far as back you look, technology gives you a huge edge. Innovation gives you a huge edge. I don't know how many of you know, Babur, when first time came to India, actually was defeated. It's the second time when he came with cannons, actually, he won. Rest is history. And the same thing you can look down. In fact, if you go back to ancient times all the way, Greeks actually had come up with the right kind of shield, with the right kind of material, and only 300 of them who fought actually against a Persian army, which were 30,000, to share an idea. So that's how the innovation makes a difference. Civilizations live or die based on innovation. So let's look at the window into our own history, and I'll connect the dots when I'm done. So who were we? And it's interesting, if we look at the list, we actually invented math, or discovered math. Invention may be a strong word. We come up with the calculus, we came up with differential equations, linear equations, quadratic equations. The list is long and long and long. And then astronomical numbers. And it's interesting, there's something called Wood's steel. I don't know how many of you actually have heard of it. There's something called Syrian steel. So Syrian steel was used for hundreds of years to make these swords, which actually had the highest amount of flexibility and at the same time the strength. But the raw material for that was provided by India, and was called Wood's steel. And that's the one where steel actually has carbon nanotubes in it. Now, a number of universities and research entities in US and Europe are trying to recreate that because that steel has a lot of value. Well, they cannot, it turns out. Art is already lost in India. So we were the innovators of the first order. Just a few years ago, I read an article in Boston Globe, that's where I live, and it was a fascinating article. In Pakistan, part of India at the time, they found this dental drill and teeth, and the holes in those teeth were so precise that even modern drills can only come close. And the article ended, was a front page news, by saying, ask your dentist to do as good a job as they did 4,000 years ago in India. That shows you who we were. Okay, that gives you a perspective where we were. Then I'll share with you what we became. Well, 1,000 years ago, we stopped innovation, pretty much stopped innovation. Not much actually came out of it. It was a huge downward revision for us as a society. In fact, I'll tell you what was interesting, that ingrained, this slavish mentality in us has become so ingrained, and it burns me up as much as I would like to control myself. So I was speaking at a college once in India, And I asked the question, okay, I put all these names, exactly the same names what's here, and I asked them, how many of you can actually say who they were? Not one hand went up, not one. So then I heard a couple of kids who were giggling and talking, and I said, oh, maybe you know the answer. So sheepishly, one girl stood up and she said, I think it was a guy, I forgot. I think it's an older cricket team. I said, well, that's a progress, at least we're thinking. So how about another thought? After some hesitation, somebody said, it got to be a TV serial. So that's where our success had been reduced down to, as funny as it was. It's also sad and unfortunate that we have completely forgotten who we were, right? We lost our confidence fundamentally and hence our ability to innovate. But this is where we come from. That's the blood that flows in our veins. That's who we were. Let's look at what we became in the last 100 years. So in the United States, there was Wright brothers who invented plane. There was Alexander Graham Bell who invented telephony. And lastly is Thomas Edison who invented the light bulbs we see. Each one of them, I believe all of us have used just in the last 24 hours. This was 100 years ago, mind you, 100 plus years ago. And by the way, none of them were in high towers of academics or anything. In fact, I believe none of them even went to college. Wright brothers are bicycle mechanic, actually. Just an idea. So these are average people. Nobody asked them who their father was, what their surname was, how rich their family was, who their mother was, who their grandfather was. None of those questions. Only thing that mattered was who they were. And that's the crux of the problem. 100 years ago, they did this. And if you look at it, can you imagine a bicycle mechanic today, 120 years later, in India, in our own land, trying to make an airplane? That tells us a lot, right? Does it not? So I think it's worth doing a retrospection and see what's happening. And even if we think that, okay, British were responsible, although I don't see why would British stop somebody trying to make a plane, but let's say they did, well, then why didn't we do it after independence? I think it begs a question. These are hard questions somebody has to ask and answer. We import just about everything today with the exception of software. In fact, if you look at all the exports we do, software is right at the very top, and then I think it comes down to gems and jewelry. So that we did even 1,000 years ago. So what has changed? We still import semiconductors, we still import electronic goods, we still import advanced machinery, we still import our arms, airplanes, name the things what we don't import today. So what has happened fundamentally? That Poly's success is now measured. So I read the other day that we spent $250 billion, maybe somebody in the panel said, on R&D in India. What is there to show for it? Do we need to measure the success by the money spent, or do we need to measure the success by the delivery that occurred against it? And I think that's where the gap is. And as far as the policies go, I mean, I'm quite excited and hopeful that Narendra Bhai will evolve, he's already doing it, where policy is now catered instead of being prosperous few to many more. And then sometimes people get annoyed. Hey, we have come a long way since independence. We didn't have anything. It's a fair point. We have come a long way. Is it sufficient? And B, what have others done in the same time frame? You see, we cannot set up our own standard. If I had to do all my question papers and answer them myself, I'll guarantee you I'll be 100% all the time. But I have to be measured against everybody else. That's the reality. And what have we done in the same time frame? If you look at South Korea, if you look at Japan, if you look at China, if you look at everybody else, I think we fall quite short. And truth is self-evident. I don't think it needs any explanation. So let's look at another data point. Enough of history. What have others done? So if you look at it, the total number of patents granted, Japan, USA, China, that shows you the pace of innovation that's picking up. So those are patents granted. Next slide shows you the patents per million population filed in 2012. You could see the benefit of population dividend here. Japanese have to invent 2 times as much as the United States to be at par with the US. Chinese only have to invent quarter of the United States to be at par with the US. We are in the same boat. Again, I read the other day that only 44,000 patents were filed, I believe, last year in India, and only 3 or 4% of them were from local population. And you compare that with the chart over here. Does it tell us the story? We as a nation, who we were, what we became, and what we are, there's a huge gap between that. No matter how
we feel about it and how much we brag about it. So the question then is, what do we do about it? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, let's recognize the problem, identify it. I really believe the future belongs to the innovation economy. It's not by tourism. It's definitely not by tourism and handicraft. I'm not denigrating them by any means. All I'm saying is that's not the way out of it. We have to do more. We have to make our economy innovation-centric. So, and I put a proposition in front which says we have to be both poverty-free and prosperous. And there's a difference between the two. Cuba is poverty-free. It's not prosperous. A small population of us is very prosperous, but are we poverty-free? So these are two lenses, and if these two lenses in my eyes, they are not well balanced. If I'm focused on one or the other, I'm going to see fuzzy. But maybe sometimes a lot of policymakers in the last 60 years didn't want to see it because the truth hurts. But the fact is that both of these have to go hand in hand. We cannot take the poverty-free part of it away from the equation. So this is the solution on the prosperity side, and I'll come to poverty-free side. And some of the recommendations we have made jointly, we worked together on the paper and looked at it. But I'll tell you, I'll say one thing. There is no way out of this quagmire unless we innovate, unless we develop our own technology, local R&D. There's no way out of it. This is a Chakravyuh. And you have to know all 7 steps, as we all know from Abhimanyu's story. Knowing even 6 is not sufficient. And guess what? We are stuck in it even at the first door. So we got to get our way out of it. And only way out of it is through innovation. And others have done it before. So by the way, it's not like we are trying to come up with a new thing which may or may not have been tested. South Korea has done it, Japan has done it, Chinese have done it. They're all doing it at this point. So if we want the country to be powerful, it has to have these 2 elements. And knowledge infrastructure. By that I don't mean bigger buildings for universities. Absolutely not. What I mean is knowledge infrastructure is the human capital. If you look at what Chinese did, they went around 1979, Deng Xiaoping went out. He went to major universities in US, and he invited every single ethnic Chinese, you come what you want and I'll do this for you. Just set up a lab at Tsinghua University, set up a lab here, do X, Y, Z. Just see, let's also face the truth that most of the advanced technology knowledge residing in us Indians' head is outside the country. That's the reality. We may disagree with it every time I say that. A lot of people get offended. Our teams are so smart, our universities are so great. I'm not saying we are not smart. I'm not saying we are not bright. Look, if we weren't, we wouldn't be doing the dental drill 4,000 years ago. All I'm saying is that's in the past. Who are we today? And let's take it, because we all carry India in our heart. Let's bring everybody who knows this, whether it's a semiconductor, whether it's aircraft, whether it's oil exploration. And let's just bring it all together so we can actually do a good job, and we can learn what Chinese have done in this front. And create, so knowledge infrastructure, along with the physical infrastructure taken together, is what drives this, as opposed to just one. As many bridges as we want to build and as many train stations we want to build, a track and stuff, it wouldn't happen unless the second piece of it is there for the innovation economy to work. And as far as patent office goes, only thing I can say is I filed a patent. I have 19 patents in different spaces. One patent I filed just to test it in India is 2006. I haven't heard back even a letter so far. So much for our patent office. I've already been granted in the United States and other places in 2010, and they gave me 3-year credit because they were late by 3 years. So we got to strengthen that. How do we expect our own people who are innovating and if we cannot protect their intellectual property? And most of the innovations, by the way, come from small and mid-size, not from the large corporations. And if the poor guy is not protected, what's the value? So next step is poverty-free piece of it. So SMBs are small and mid-sized businesses. Large chunk of invention in the United States today come from individuals and small and mid-sized businesses. Nowhere else. That's the bedrock of economy, actually. And that's what's going to go at the front end of as things happen. So our recommendations are here. They're also in the white paper. So I suggest if we can spend, and again, not the government, even half of CSR funds on it, even 10,000 crore rupees a year. All I'm saying is 10 lakhs rupees per village. 2 science teachers and machinery to play. And we will have our own Wright brothers and Thomas Edison and our own everybody else, Alexander Graham Bell. 10,000 crore rupees is a drop in the bucket. And please don't have government do it. As Jan said, keep it out of the government. CSR money can do it, companies can do it, and so forth. This will also transform. What it will do is it will take the last man and make them actually the front man, the front line of our economic strength of the defense team. That's what United States does today. So that's what we got to transform the first man. So what it will do, it will enable the migration. Timely, it will take time from handouts to hands-on. That's the key difference. Hands out to hands-on is really about how do we make this migration free. So this excites me, I'll tell you. I'm excited. I think the timing is right, the leadership is right, and who's sensitive to it. And this is the last piece. As you could see, end of the day, it's about right to dignified living at the lowest level. I think that's what this whole battle is about. And I think our growth can be much higher than 7 or 8%. If we do very efficient government, we'll get to 8%. But if we excite the bottom half of it, we could go to 12%, which means doubling up, as we all know, every 6 years of the economy. That, I think, is the biggest thing. So I want to thank you for taking time to allow me to share my ideas with you, and really appreciate your patience. Thank you.
I believe I totally agree with what Mukesh has sort of said. Innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship has to go hand in hand together. Now, today, one of the big problem is that India actually import most of its products, particularly the technology-based products. It has been increasing. For example, almost all capital goods it imports. Electronic import bill is second only to the oil, and that was when the oil was at the peak price. I don't know what the current situation is. The other problem that we find that large industries are not always the best technology innovators. They are good at scaling it once the technology is developed. Very often, in fact, even in the United States, you'll find that it's the small companies which innovate, come up with products, start something, and then a larger company buys it out and then scales up. So I think the key thing is, as far as I'm concerned, is the startup. And I'll specifically talk about startup with R&D linkages, because then only the innovation comes. With universities and otherwise, often create the most innovative technology and products. They fill the gap in the technology transfer cycle, which the large industry is not able to do. If you look at the last 15 years or so, you will see that the first generation have, in fact, made a huge difference, in fact, 20 years or so, in job creations. There are companies like Infosys, Sun Pharma, Mindtree, etc., which have really made a huge difference. And you also see large number of startups has taken place in India. And in fact, they have often led in the technological change and innovation resulting into enhanced productivity. The young people are now starting to get very, very interested in this innovation and entrepreneurship. For example, 5 years back, almost if you take the top 15% of the students at IIT, 50% of them will go to banking jobs, 50% will go to abroad for masters and PhD. Today, a third of them are actually joining startup, and that is increasing. Year after year, it is increasing, and we are kind of looking at that almost 50% will really join startup. And entrepreneurship has the potential to create a large number of successful high-growth ventures. I'm kind of hoping that about 2,500 successful high-growth ventures can be created over the next 10 years, which can make a difference, and India would be very, very different. Over last decade or so, till in 90s, basically there was a huge debate within the university, is universities should pursue Saraswati or Lakshmi? This question used to be asked. And somewhere around 2000 or so, it was kind of settled, and we started looking at this whole entrepreneurship in a serious manner. And the first generation of entrepreneurs, increasing availability of capital, people like Jayant came and started making a difference, and we started seeing things happen. For example, one initiative by Department of Science and Technology has helped set up 75 university-based incubators, providing about 2.5 crore rupees to each such incubator. About a third of them are successful, but that's quite a lot. This has happened with the support of TDB, DST, and some seed capital has also been provided. Similarly, if you look at BIRAC has set up about 13 incubators, came in much more recently in last 3 to 4 years in biotechnology sector, and it has also provided a fairly large amount of startups. It has started providing grants to get the young incubators started in this whole venture. And it is not just that. There are 40 accelerators which have nothing to do with universities. They have started. And there are companies like Coca-Cola, Reliance, Microsoft, Oracle, Boeing. They're all starting this accelerator and suddenly starting to attract. So suddenly we are seeing that there are fairly large number of startups taking place in India. What do the startup do? Of course, this is an example of what we do at IIT Madras. More or less similar thing is done pretty much everywhere. It provides, of course, the branding. It provides the business support. Almost all accounting, tax, company secretary, legal, IP. It provides mentoring. Mentoring is probably the most important thing, particularly for the young entrepreneurs, first generation entrepreneurs. Mentoring is the most important thing, and this is where the key challenge lies. The other thing is seed funding. The seed funding it provides, because there are various agencies which are starting to provide the seed funding. Now, in fact, the CSR from the industry is starting to, the seed funding is starting to trickle in. I know, for example, Omidyar had given to IIT Madras some seed funding support. So there are all kind of such support is starting to become available. And then networking, whole lot of networking. And this is all besides infrastructure. So this has been actually going on in the incubation space. Let me come to the challenges. And I'm actually also putting down that there are a whole variety of companies that have been created in this process. And not in IT sector alone. There are companies which are doing dairy work. There are companies which are getting agricultural machinery. And for the key challenges seems to be that up to 5 to 20, 25 lakhs rupees today, that kind of seed funding is available from some source or other, government source, CSR source, and all that. But beyond that, once you start getting slightly higher, like 25 lakhs to about 2 crore, 2.5 crore rupees, there is a huge, basically weak system. There is not enough angel investors. The other problem still continues to be that understanding the failures in startup. For example, Indian culture still very often look at the failure as a black mark. And one of the main things that we try to teach our incubatees is that it is the multiple failures which will result into success, so don't worry about it. But very often the family members, etc., do not fully understand that it's changing, but not changing fast enough. We also find that closing a business is one of the biggest problems. Even if there are very, very little obligations, the closing a business in India is not easy. It's such a laborious process. Either you just drop it, in which case there can always be problems. The founders find it very difficult, and there are failed business which will close, and we need to make it smooth. The other problem that we are finding is a serious problem where very small companies with hardly 1 crore rupees, 70 lakhs rupees turnover, and suddenly you see a whole lot of inspectors coming. In fact, the incubator at IIT Madras has become a favorite place where one or the other inspector is all the time sitting. There's a PF inspector, ESI inspector, service tax inspector, VAT, excise duty. They scare people away. They scare. What is most important, we try our them best to see that none of them violate anything. But even then, it's almost becoming scary. And I think we need to revisit revenue limits. There is certain amount of things at which you have to allow a company to grow to a certain size before they can start spending serious money into something like this. The other very important thing, there are a whole lot of HNIs that we are familiar with. They do not do angel investing, because though returns in angel investing can be quite high, and we don't have sufficient instruments. Even I don't know even there are mutual funds which actually invest as angel funds. I think there is a huge opportunity, and there are large number of people who have that kind of money. We need to make it possible. And all the time people complain about one tax issue or one problem or another. I think Jayant knows all of them. I don't have to talk about it. So I'm hoping that he is going to clear this. Then this whole 10,000 crore rupees. We have been hearing about this for some time. Unfortunately, it has not been done. He has promised us that he will get things started very, very soon. My feeling is that 10% of this money one should seriously examine of trying to get it to this university-based incubator for providing that bridge funding between 25, 50 lakhs, 1 crore. With minimal amount of interference, you need to do some overseeing that there is no funds misuse, but I think this will reach large number of people in the quickest possible manner. And then I think TDB, BIRAC, etc. can also provide about 25% of the funding could also be looked at this. The other ideas are, again, largely come from a report that was prepared by, I think Jayant was the chairman of that committee which did this. Develop and scale up debt funding. Small B initiative that has been taken, the collateral-free loan from SME, and the develop lending options for innovative startups. Can develop technology and build businesses to ensure that every family, we need to challenge this to create business, technology and business which can ensure that every family can get an affordable house. Maybe 50% of them can affordable power and 24/7 power. Can they get 50% of power from solar? These are some of the big challenges. Many of these big challenges are being put forward. We just need to sort of get the technology startups pushed in that direction. When we do that, you will find that wonder can actually be done. I do see that there is a large possibility, particularly with very large number of youngsters who wanting to do startups. I think we just need to push that and make things a little bit smoothen. Thank you very much.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here. Thank you to the organizers for organizing this wonderful couple of days for all of us. And thank you to all my fellow panelists. We collaborated over the last couple of weeks to pull together this paper. I thought, given that we had a lot of focus on technology, and I know Alok is going to talk about the capital side, I wanted to talk specifically about talent, because the way I approach this is thinking like an economist a little bit and say that there are various things that have to be put into the secret sauce to make a new entrepreneurial venture. You need ideas, which both Mukesh and Ashok talked about. You need intellectual property protection, of course, which we touch upon in this white paper that we produced and is woefully deficient in India, as Mukesh's patent woes illustrate amply. We need capital. The capital side is something that's been exhaustively studied. I think most of us at least conceptually understand the sorts of things that need to be done. It's a little bit tricky navigating through the policy apparatus to get it done. The debt side is in big trouble, for sure, and the angel investment side is also quite problematic. So we can come back to those issues in the Q&A. But if you take a look at the last 50 years of new enterprise creation in the OECD countries, the Western world, it is definitely true, and there was a gentleman who showed a lovely slide this morning in one of the other panels of net job creation by new enterprises and job destruction by incumbent enterprises. So that's stylized fact number one. It's true in country after country that have, shall we say, capitalist economies where there is vibrant new enterprise creation and the permitted destruction of old enterprises, which of course we don't allow, as we saw with the exit barriers to our enterprises. However, when you decompose the startups that have generated net jobs, the vast majority of them, I'm hesitating to put a number out there because it's very context dependent, it changes from country to country, are not in so-called tech enterprises of the sort that Mukesh and Ashok are talking about. It is true that you can put up names, in this country it would be Flipkart, or Amazon or Infosys, and those are rightly celebrated as amazing stories because they generate a lot of jobs and they're fundamentally different. But the vast majority of incremental job creation comes from the other examples that Mukesh was using in his historical part of his talk, which is the mechanic who didn't have to worry about whose son or daughter he or she was, and just came up with a tinkering new way of doing something and somehow was able to generate a new enterprise. That's where the bulk of enterprise comes from. And in a sense, it's all technology, because what is technology? It's just a new way of doing things. But it's not necessarily the high-tech R&D, semiconductor fab things. And I really would like us not to lose sight of that, because frankly, most of the job creation that's going to come for the so-called demographic dividend that we aspire to, and that has been alluded to in this conference already multiple times this morning, is going to come from the humdrum innovations that will drive lots of 1, 2, 5, 10% new enterprises. And if we can somehow make that smooth, that is entrepreneurship, that is development, that's fundamental job creation, and that's the kind of thing that will propel people out of poverty in our decentralized democratic system. So that's my belief. Again, doesn't take away from the importance of technology and incubators and so on, but that's where the emphasis, in my view, has to be. The second comment is about Ashok's talk on incubators. So I teamed up with a few people myself to launch an incubator a few months ago in Bangalore. So I'm very much a believer in incubators and thinking that it can generate a lot of net social value as well as private gain. But I think we're in early days of incubators. There has to be a lot of experimentation. We've got an incubator starting every week or every day somewhere in the country. And I think that's great, because anytime you look at a new industry, you see a lot of ferment, a lot of experimentation. And like any other new form, corporate form, new enterprise, we should see a lot of failure in these incubators. So I fully expect that if our incubator fails, that I would be the first one advocating to shut it down, right? So I don't think it's a good idea for us to end up cascading into a situation where we have, as we know, our universities are particularly resistant to, dare I say it in this atmosphere, reform. And so I would really be worried about ending up in a situation where we open hundreds of incubators in universities that we cannot shut down, because that again will be the kiss of death. Rather, what we need to see is competition. We need to see the incubators competing with each other to attract the best talent to come to them, to then produce the most vibrant enterprises. And we need to shine just a very transparent light on them, so that those that are not fulfilling the efficient incubation function are allowed to pass away into history somehow. And we don't do that. We are not spending any time thinking about the exit function, either on new enterprise creation or on incubators. So those are my sort of amplifying, shaping comments. And my colleagues are nodding, so I think they agree with me. So good, we're all in agreement. So on the talent side, I had two basic comments to make. The first is that we meaning in this country, in our country, in India, we don't generate the kind of talent, we don't educate people in the way that I think most, shall I say, thinking people think that we should be doing things. We are still products of a largely rote-driven, memorizing type of culture, and it would be nice to find ways to get more discussion-oriented learning going in our schools. Now, of course, I say this with, just the enormity of the challenge of doing that looms in front of me. But by nature, I'm an optimist, and I prefer to see a glass as half full instead of half empty. And the flip side of the enormity of this challenge is that there are, again, so many experiments going on. I just finished teaching at Harvard one of our very first so-called MOOCs, massively online courses, and it was targeted on healthcare entrepreneurship in poor countries. And I have to tell you, it was a fascinating experience. It lasted for about 8 weeks. We put it out there. I did it jointly with a medical doctor and an epidemiologist. Fabulous MacArthur, double MacArthur Prize winner. MacArthur Prize is a prize given to geniuses in the world, so-called geniuses in the world. And it's someone who I met to partner with because both she and I thought that we brought something completely different to the table about how do you create healthcare enterprises that are both profitable and scalable, which can solve the big healthcare challenges of the world, right? And it was just a blast. I had such a great time doing it. She's a complete scientist, a doctor, an epidemiologist, and a public health specialist specializing in Africa and Latin America. And I'm an academic coming from India, sometime entrepreneur. I've created some companies in this country, and a student of entrepreneurship. We put the thing out, and we immediately had, I forget the number, 15 to 20,000 people sign up for it from 50 countries around the world, and just a vibrant debate. And I was teaching this class at Harvard just these last few weeks, and a physical class in the Harvard College classroom. And I found, I have to say, that my attentions were entirely taken up by the so-called MOOC, this online course. Of course, partly because of the novelty factor of it, But the debate was just so much more vibrant than even my Harvard classroom, because you had people from Botswana saying something, you had people from Canada, from the UK, from Argentina, just coming up and throwing out ideas, saying, in my country, this is what happens, this is what worked. And we've got a whole bunch of new enterprises starting in virtual space on healthcare, right? And if we can do this, and it doesn't cost much. This was just a camera, an online connection, and a curator. Right? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much more than that. So you can imagine if you had a system to do this, we would immediately think of creative ways of doing things. Right? So I think on the generation of talent, if we can again encourage experiments to think about non-traditional ways of doing things. Now again, I fully recognize the reality in our smaller cities and our villages where people don't even show up to the classroom, teachers are absent, people are sitting on the floor. I get it. But I'm saying that there's room for experimentation on all sides. And if we don't do that, we'll be stuck with the kind of talent that is not equipped to be creative in the modern world. So that's one. The second comment I have is not about new talent generation, but taking the existing talent stock and using it optimally. So we think about optimal capital allocation all the time, right? We've got a whole slew of capital market players sitting in the room who've done amazing service to the country and have done very well for themselves by making sure that capital goes to the right use, right? And when things are not getting done well, deal structure, this, that, and the others, any number of much financial engineering that goes into it. On the talent side, we have a broken system, right? When I was growing up in Delhi and Bombay and Bangalore, everybody, of course, wanted to be an engineer or a doctor and things like that. Thankfully, things are much more eclectic and diverse now already compared to my generation and the generations prior to mine. But we are still so far away from allowing people to figure out what it is that they should be doing with their lives and giving them the tools, giving them the flexibility, giving them the freedom to experiment with it. With that in mind, two kids, one from IIT Delhi and one from MIT, and I started this company called Aspiring Minds, which Umidyar backed initially. And all it does is it takes people, it's a Delhi-based company but now has reach across the world. It takes kids and assesses them using scalable machine learning techniques to say, these are the kinds of things that you're good at, these are the things you're good at, these are the things you're good at. And equivalently goes to potential employers and tells them what are the kinds of people that they should be looking for, so that we're not forced to look at the IITs and the Harvards of the world, right? And recognize that 99.9% of talent isn't going to come from these places that have a label stamped on their head. Now, I had the good fortune, and all these people had the good fortune to go to some fabulous institutions, but 99% of people don't. And they are every bit as talented as us, and they deserve a chance to get to the right kind of opportunity. So in summary, my two comments on talent are, one, we need far better ways, far cleverer ways, and I do not believe that these are all expensive. I do believe that they're doable with a little bit of creativity. We need far better ways to train our talent for the next century, for the next decades. And we need much better ways to allocate talent to the best use. Because on both those fronts, we are, in a first-order sense, wasting even the endowment that we have currently. And we can't afford to do that if we want to really capitalize on our demographic dividend going forward. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
I think one of the things we haven't done, either as society or as policymakers, is to recognize entrepreneurship as a fundamental building block of the economy. It essentially allows us to organize both capital and talent around ideas and knowledge, instead of organizing them around either natural resources or, worse still, organizing talent itself around capital. And I think we need to look at entrepreneurship as that fundamental tool. It's not a silo that sits on its own, but whenever we think of fundamental problems that are facing us, inclusive growth, job creation, import substitution, I think we need to start to look at entrepreneurship as a fundamental delivery mechanism for some of those. In a country where organized labor is a very small fraction of our total labor pool, honestly, to me, equity of opportunity can come only through entrepreneurship. We are not going to create enough jobs, enough education to make sure that equity arises out of those tools. Today, a retailer who's sitting in a small village is an entrepreneur on their own, and the more enabled they are, that is what leads to equity of entrepreneurship opportunity. So with these overall remarks, I'm going to go down and kind of address a couple of issues on the capital side that we should look at various forums. I think one is that while there is increasing capital that has been available to entrepreneurship, there are both market failures and viability gaps that have not allowed capital to flow to all the sectors where it needs to. For illustration, about 80% of the early stage capital today flows in the top 6 cities. About 50% flows only to the information technology sector, and increasingly that is getting concentrated towards just internet companies. Admittedly, because of the success that we have seen in those sectors. But what that does is leaves broad areas outside of the realm of access to early stage capital, both on a regional basis and on a sectoral basis. So let's start looking at what our priorities as a country should be are. There's a whole bunch of social needs that we are trying to solve. There is a job creation need that we are trying to solve, and I agree with Tarun fully that just IT entrepreneurship is not going to solve that for us. We need to have a broader base of entrepreneurial ventures to be able to do that. There are sectoral needs like manufacturing and defense. There are strategic needs like import substitution. Now, early stage capital has to start flowing in those areas. And any fund allocation decisions that we make towards supporting entrepreneurship must take those national priorities into account. There is a need to enhance debt capital. Many of these areas are not fundable on an equity capital basis because equity capital typically tends to reward companies that will have super scale at the end of it. All of entrepreneurship is not about creating $1 billion company or dying. A lot of it is about creating good cash flow businesses that might not be great capital exits. And debt financing is essential to support those kind of businesses. Incidentally, again, those kind of businesses tend to be the largest swath of businesses that entrepreneurs come up with, even though they make less noise in media. So I think that is one thought that I want to leave with of saying, where should our capital allocation go? And my view is it should go to where commercial capital might not be flowing easily today, but those are areas that are of national interest. I think the second piece is the leverage that any public capital must gain in terms of both private capital and in terms of private capacity to deploy that capital. We've spoken about corporate venture capital funds. I have a different view on CSR money being used for this purpose, but certainly, very much in favor of having companies establish venture capital funds and being encouraged to do so, because that just doesn't bring in the capital into play; it brings in the capability of the company into play. Similarly, there are examples from other countries on how private capital can be leveraged. Someone, in the morning was referring to the YOSMA program in Israel. By and large, they leveraged the $100 million they had several folds by taking the first loss guarantee on private capital. In the end, that guarantee never came into play because the ventures made money. But we must see how public funds are leveraged, both using private capital as well as private capacity. There are several other sources of private capacity like distribution and access channels like microfinance institutions, cooperatives, and so on. So I think that's my second point on how we should look at deploying capital that we want to use to encourage entrepreneurship. The first one being address unaddressed areas that are of national priority. The second one being leverage private capital and capacity for doing that. My final remark has to do with the other end of the capital flow in entrepreneurship, which is the exits. The reason why private capital has not flowed in as rapidly as it could into entrepreneurship has less to do with whether that capital has generated the right kind of businesses and growth, and much more to do with whether it has generated the right kind of liquidity and exits for the investors. And a lot of that is a matter of policies. Again, there was a mention in the morning of many of the perceived Indian companies not really being Indian companies. More and more of them shifting to Singapore and so on. Those are just artifacts of defective policy that we have regarding public market listings in India. There are M&A restrictions and lack of clarity on taxation, which discourage acquirers to come in and acquire high growth companies in India. So there are all those policy elements that we need to look at. Ultimately, capital flow is about liquidity. If capital comes out, more capital will come back in. And I think we need to examine those policy steps to make sure that there is a continuous flow of capital and an increasing flow of capital that we need to come into entrepreneurship. So with that, I'll close my remarks and happy to take more during the Q&A.
Is that in India, we are in a race against time. We're in a race against time because if we see some of the big forces bearing down on us, the first and most important one, of course, is our demographics. We have an extraordinary bulge right now of young people entering the workforce, and we have to, it's a moral responsibility. It's also a political necessity for us to create jobs for them. So it's extraordinarily important that we get these folks into the workforce in the formal sector as quickly as possible. That's one of the reasons why we have to move as quickly as possible, point one. Point two, if you look at what is happening with respect to global climate change, the whole nature of production is going to change as a result of that, because we all know what's happening, what is already in place and in motion with respect to carbon in the atmosphere. The fact that we have to move to a low carbon trajectory, the Lima Accord has just been put in place. Paris will see further changes to the industrial economy, to the global economy, and so on. So we are in a real race against time to be able to fashion a low carbon economy that can really take into account some of the big changes that are happening with respect to global climate change. That's the second reason why we're in a race against time. The third reason why we're in a race against time is because of the machines. And with what is happening in terms of automation of manufacturing, automation of the service sector, software automation and so on, a lot of jobs are going to be pulled out of the economy. What we need to do to transition to the next version of capitalism, that's the race against time that we are in India right now. And in that race, the only way we can win is through entrepreneurship and innovation.
One of the things which is actually a theme of this whole conference is how do we connect this with what is truly Indian in the community sense. I've been struck by a terrible irony in our country, which is that here we have communities that are entrepreneurial and that you cannot suppress them. It's not so much, it is about capital, it's about access to capital, but it's about how the state treats or does not treat our communities that are innately entrepreneurial. Your starting comment, Mr. Chairman, the state needs to get out of the way. Can we change the attitude of the state to become an enabler of our entrepreneurial communities?
No, we are trying, and I completely agree with you, Rajiv, that we have a tremendous foundation to build on, and really, what we have to do, and this is what strikes me in Parliament when I sit with my colleagues and hear them talk about, what should be done, etc., is we have inherently an interventionist approach, which is the state wants to be a player on the field, whereas the reality is the state is the empire. So we have to change mindset.
So what can we do to change the culture in our universities, which is very insular, which is very top-down, to make them more dynamic, open, and receptive to entrepreneurship and innovation?
Some extent it's happening. Unfortunately, it's happening at a slower pace. But I told you, like 60 to 70 universities, there are already moves, and you are seeing about 10, 15. And I think it takes about 3-4 years. Suddenly you will start seeing 30, 40. I think if we all get to going and sort of say, no, this is what we actually want, it will happen much faster. I see the pace of change has been very rapid in last few years.
The social enterprise ecosystem in this country, there's very high mortality rate. There's a lot of reasons for it. I have worked with them. I think the singular problem is they don't know how to work in communities. And their focus on profits, most of them come from business schools, most of the people who start these up. In the context of this particular conclave, when you're talking about human development, we're talking about integration. The fundamental problem in this country, in the curriculum, is the lack of social sciences. The social scientists don't know about the business people don't learn about social science. So until you get this connect, which is a little bit better in the United States, I think we will continue to have this problem.
In the United States at least, I think there is more of a case to be built for actually a separation between the specialized training that we provide to business schools versus the social science training for a variety of reasons. But I think in a developing country like India, where the interfaces between the professions are necessarily amorphous or ambiguous to some extent, what I mean by that is when you're running a business in Hazaribagh, you can't afford to say that society's problems are not mine. They are going to affect your balance sheet and your income statement in a ready way. So you have to be open to the social science influences, if you will. So I'm very sympathetic to your comment, and the more so in countries
Very
like
quickly,
India.
just to support her, we lost sight of liberal arts in the last 60, 70 years. To become creative and innovative, you need to have vertical knowledge, but you need to have broader mindset, and that is biggest issue that also we are confronting. Of course, we are evolving. Very quickly, my question is that what would you do to encourage social businesses or social entrepreneurship, what you call? Silicon Valley has become a technology hub for entrepreneurship. India could be the biggest social entrepreneurship hub because scalability is high, cost of failure is low, and therefore I think there is good deal of experimentation we can do. What do you think? In fact, CSR, which had this item of social business in the Companies Act, it has been quietly removed without making it public.
I would say whether it is regular entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, depending on whether it's focused on the base of the pyramid or not. Really, I think there are 4 things that are required. Number one, the 10,000 crore fund of funds should be used to create a domestic venture capital industry. We actually don't genuinely have a domestic venture capital industry. You might know that 90% of the venture capital in India comes from offshore sources. So we have to create, a $10-15 billion domestic venture capital industry. That's point one. Point two, I think, taking the 75 incubators, 100 incubators that we have right now, we really have to get them to a point where we are not giving them 2.5 crores a year, but are giving them 25 crores a year for 8 or 10 through some kind of a prize competition. So we really take 10 or 15 of those and massively scale them up so they have the resources and the talent to really support entrepreneurs. That's point two. Point three, what I think we need to do is we need to have 4 or 5 grand challenges. So for example, you might have heard that Bill Gates is running a grand challenge right now as to how can we build a better toilet. So maybe what we do is, particularly on India's big social problems, we say the Prime Minister will give a 5 crore prize to whichever team that comes up with the solution to this and this problem. That I think will draw incredible media attention and drive a lot of excitement around solving India's social problems. And then the fourth thing is, I absolutely think whether it's CSR or corporate venture capital or whatever it is, we need to get our corporations involved in terms of talent, in terms of research, in terms of exits. So we really have to get, and some of them are doing quite a bit. The Tatas are already doing a lot, but we need to get our corporates involved some more. Mahindra is doing a lot. So that's my 4-point agenda for what we can do to drive entrepreneurship right away.
Yeah, one point I will just like to add here, that today 25% of the engineering students come from rural India. And many of them, when they are looking at entrepreneurship, they are not looking at IT entrepreneurship. They are looking at in their own villages, in their own areas, what can actually do. And I think that's becomes. Number two, I totally agree that for any such enterprise, if you don't involve social scientists, it just is bound to fail. We have always found that we need technology, social scientists, business people to come together and kind of guide. And that is one of the roles that all those who are looking at social enterprise have to do.
The question for me is, he mentioned that companies are going to Singapore to be better protected. But the panel in general did not talk about protection of right, who normally is a state activity. But probably in the future, imagine Russia company has license to sell cigarettes. And if Russia starts a war with Europe, they can just send a cigarette to Europe. It's a big business. They make 4 times the money. And who will control that? So you are not talking, because Angola cannot control the global market protection. So you're assuming the right will be protected by someone you like it, but I'm not sure why. So A, B, or C is, the problem exists and you have no idea what to do, and so, or ignorant, that's option A, ignorance. Option B, the problem is not existing. The problem is wrong, it's not a real problem, and then it's okay. Or C, denial.
So for the most, I choose option B, which is the problem is not relevant to the vast majority of conversation that's been going on for the hour, because most of it is very tiny stuff that's localized. That's option B. And for the 10%, I think it exists, and we do know what to do about it, which is to have a race to the top as opposed to a race to the bottom. That is what people have been advocating, which is to say, let's put the best policies out there so that our companies are not forced to run away to the other better jurisdictional outcome, but stay with us. So B and A.
I really believe that if we are to go to the next level as a country, we need to build IP and every form, in healthcare and defense and tech. And that can only come through entrepreneurship and innovation. So if and the problem, as you also said, is a state being too interventionist. So if we create SEZs to spur manufacturing activity,
which is devoid of, which has protected from the state, can we create SIZs, just an idea, like special innovation zones, wherein at least for a certain period of time, you are an incubator in a true sense, wherein till a certain level, till a company grows to a certain level, it's not competing with the others with, getting your leave and license thing, getting your, shop and establishment, getting your sales tax, MAT, all of that. Is it possible to take it to that, is it possible to create an SIZ, like a special innovation zone?
Yeah, no, it's a great idea, and Alok and I worked on a report for the Planning Commission more than 2 years ago, where we in fact suggested something very similar, where we said that just like the IT industry flourished because of STPI, the software technology parks, where we had a much more liberal regulatory regime for them, we should have something similar, as you're saying, as an innovation zone. And then we make it very easy to get incorporated, very easy to close a business down. For instance, just as an example, suppose we had 100 licensed incubators, right? Of which, as I said, 10 of them are of national scale and are getting 25 crores a year. And we could say that if you're registered as a company in these 100 incubators, you're effectively working in an STPI-like zone where you can start a company and close a company down very quickly. So that could be one way of doing it. You see, but those are absolutely things that we are considering.
Okay, so there are two components of my question. First is about the curriculum. Second is, even apart from this, if you look at the way the teaching is imparted today, there is no orientation towards innovation. In fact, children are stopped to think. They are just said that this is what you have to do. So these are two things which are, I think, are very, very important, especially when we are talking, looking for sustainable Indian economy. Thank you so much.
I will speak from my personal experience. When I went to grad school in US, it was interesting. I had a Korean professor who could barely speak English. Brilliant, brilliant guy. Since he couldn't speak English, and it was an advanced computer architecture course, which is about probably the highest order course you can take. Since he couldn't speak English, he basically assigned homework assignment, which basically said, this is the 30 pages. When you come to the class, come prepared. And I don't want to know what is in the paper. I want to know what each solution that's described at that time, what Cray Computer did or IBM did. And I want you to come up with an answer which is different or better, but it will be your answer. You wouldn't believe, class started out with 50 students, it became 120, they had to close it. That was the most popular course, and that's probably course is something where I learned the most, where I figured that I may be younger, and all these people have done big guys, big name, all the wonderful job, but I could come up with an answer which was better than them. Right? So I could solve my own problems. So you don't have to go to grad school in US to do that. That's in fact when I was mentioning about the public, the poverty-free India. That's exactly what I had in mind. What you're suggesting, which is let's take a school, high school in a village. My mother came from a village. I spent a lot of time there. I come from a small city. But let's give them car engine. Okay, small car engine. Take it from Ambassador. It doesn't matter their time. It doesn't anyway these days. Pick a car engine. Pick a small things, machines you can play with. Give the farm equipment, for example, give that machine. Ask them to make something out of it. I think that's the best way. You get hands-on training, hands-on way to create something better, faster. So when Dr. Swami spoke this morning about agriculture investment, it's really not just this, sowing the seed. What it means is the farming equipment. What it means, ultra low cost refrigeration. If you can come up with it, the farmer can actually milk the cow, put the milk, and if it's, so it doesn't get bad, right? So there are the farm equipment you can improve by yourself. It's that our ability to solve our own problems is what we need to actually encourage the kids in the college. So there are two professors here, so I'm sorry I took that question, but I couldn't resist.
Patent Act we spoke about. Is there anything happening whereby we can see in the next 3 months' time this whole patent thing can be put in place and the law can be made as advanced as it is in the best of countries?
No, we are certainly seized of the matter. It's a very important issue. Given all the issues that we're working on right now, I don't think we'll get resolution in the next 3 months. Whether it is financing or whether it's reducing the inspector Raj and so on, we are absolutely working on it. I myself am administratively responsible for income tax, customs, and excise. So if any one of you has a problem with any of these three, let me know and we'll fix it.